Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is a co-founder of Square. Prior to founding Square, he was a glass-blowing artist, recovering computer scientist, Twitter and Square's co-founder Jack Dorsey's former boss and longtime friend. Currently, he is the founder of Invisibly, LaunchCloud, and Third Degree Glass Factory, co-founder and general partner at FinTop Capital. He also serves as the deputy chair of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis and is on the board of trustees of Washington University in St. Louis. His name is Jim McKelve. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Hi, Grace. Good to see you.
I have to say your book is awesome. I wish I read this 10 years ago. It's easy to understand. It's informative. It's funny.
Thanks. I wish I'd known a lot of that stuff earlier myself. I've had several conversations with people who said, boy, where was this book 20 years ago when I needed it? But look, I didn't realize a lot of the stuff until Square got attacked by Amazon. And then I mean, it took me 2 years of solid research to figure out what the hell happened to me, in my own company. So I'm not surprised that it's sort of a revelation to some people who haven't lived through it.
I mean, I love that. I feel like if I already successfully started Square, I would not try to figure out why Square succeed. But I think that's such a great thing to do.
So I think it was survivor's guilt. I mean, I think what I felt after Amazon. So for those of you who don't know, Amazon copied Square's products when we were a startup. When Amazon does this to a startup, the startup dies. That happens 100% of the time, at least up until Square. And then we were the only company to ever really survive that onslaught. And a year later, Amazon gave up. And I was super happy about that. But I was also, it felt really weird because it's like, well, why did that happen? Like I couldn't explain what happened. I had this feeling of survivor's guilt. So that's what led me to the book and to do all the research. And then what I did was I eventually found, dozens of other companies that had the same thing happen to them. And I was like, oh, wait a second, there's a pattern here. And honestly, I wasn't even sure I was going to write a book, but Herb Kelleher, who's the founder of Southwest Airlines and a legend. And I know you wouldn't think there's much in common between, an airline and a, tech company, but I thought that the Southwest story fit the Square pattern. I thought it had an innovation stack. Mm-hmm. And so I went down to talk to Herb and he, it's really weird because I basically took all this research and I said, here's what I think. What do you think? And then I just shut up and let the man talk for like 2.5 hours. And at the end of the 2.5 hours, he got really excited about what I'd sort of been talking about. Mm-hmm. And he says, how are you going to share this with the world? Like, what's your next step? Like, how are you going to take this and not just make it some personal thing? And I was like, oh, crap, I got to write a book.
So that's how the book create a podcast. So
yeah, I could have done a podcast. But, for me, the act of writing is really good because I can redo it and redo it and redo it until the words are really right. Mm-hmm. And then I can shorten it. So this book, every time I write it or rewrote it, it got shorter.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love the length of the book. And then I feel like it's so easy to read. So I normally just listening to audiobook and then I read this book. I feel like, I'm trying to find your dirty joke in here, but maybe because I'm Chinese, so it's hard for me.
Yeah. If you're not a 10-year-old American boy, it's a little hard to, it might be a little, so the story of the dirty joke.
Yeah.
Okay. I wrote it and I was on an airplane and I started laughing out loud because I've got a really childish sense of humor. And then I erased it. And I thought, oh, wait a second. No, I'm being a jerk because I knew my editor would have fun crossing it out. Like I knew he'd enjoy going, you can't say that. So I left it in. Unbeknownst to me, my editor had already taken another job. So he had basically checked out for the last like third of the book. I don't even know if he read it. I mean, I'm sure he read it, but he probably read it, with a beer in his hand or something. But like he was basically really tough on me for the first third of the book. And then the second he was and the third he was just gone. So
I feel you.
So I told him, I said, man, you missed the dirtiest joke I've ever written. And he's like, well, you got to tell me where it is. And I was like, no, actually, I don't. You got to find it. So he never found it. So I made it into print. And I'm not telling anyone where it is because it would embarrass me. But it's in there.
Oh gosh.
It's definitely in there.
I'm gonna watch maybe like 20 episodes of South Park and then find it again just in case.
South Park will help. That is a good way to get sort of dialed in. Perfect.
I feel you. In this book, you are very humble. You spend some chapters talking about other successful founders. To start the show, I would love to talk about you for a minute. You wrote a textbook in college in a subject matter you're not an expert in. You worked as a glass blowing artist. You hired an intern, and he turned out to be one of the most successful founders in tech, Jack Dorsey. Eventually, you successfully started Square with him. You interviewed your hero, Herb Kelleher. What a life journey. What's your favorite experience among these incredible events? What impact you the most?
Well, I think the events that impact me the most are ones that don't make good stories. They're like one of my friends is having a real problem right now in his family, and I'm spending a lot of time with him. And that's hugely impactful. It's not a good story. I happen to be lucky because I have said yes to so many crazy things that over the course of my life so far, crazy things generate good stories. Okay, hanging out with sane people who are super rational and really dialed in and super organized doesn't lead to great stories. Hanging out with Bob Pazderka, who, like, I saw him last week. And he's still nuts. He's the guy with the car, the hood.
Yeah, in your book, yeah.
But that's just one of probably 100 stories. Now, Bob's got his issues, right? But that's the people I tend to gravitate towards. And so as a result of saying yes to a bunch of stupid stuff that I probably shouldn't be doing, and hanging out with people who are also doing stuff they probably shouldn't be doing. You end up with a bunch of stories, right? And the best stories are ones where there's a calamity, right? The best stories are the ones where, it goes wrong. So yeah, that also leads to a lot of humility. I mean, I think that, what much wiser person than I said, I've got a lot to be humble about. And I believe it. I should just shut up and listen most of the time.
I think that's awesome that you're still friends with people who was close to you and mattered to you before you become a billionaire. That's just incredible.
Well, but Grace, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's so much easier for me to trust people who liked me before all the fancy money and notoriety, all the stuff that happened, really warps your sense of, or I won't say for you, but like for me, I'm less trusting these days because I meet people and they're charming, they're really nice, and they're super cool. And then I think, well, maybe they just want money. Like maybe they just want an introduction. Maybe they just want get the kid into Square or some other. So I'm much more suspicious. But if you hung out with me, 15 years ago when I was pretty much the same as I am today, but I wasn't sort of billionaire or anything. I think they get grandfathered in, and I cherish those friends. Like those people to me have no other motivation that is, perverse. So it's kind of lonely in my situation, but you don't get to complain about it, right?
I mean, I think it is a real issue. Like, I feel like that's why probably a lot of people don't really know who their real friends are after they got hit a certain stage of success. So they can only, I guess, like hang out with people that are like either all on the same financial situation with them, or like, I feel like it is kind of lonely. I feel you.
It is. I had a guy that I met, this was 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And I was hanging out with a friend in Tokyo, and this guy had gotten separated from his wife that night, right? And my friend was gay, and this guy was straight, and I'm straight. So like I had to handle the straight guy because the gay guy was off in his thing, and I was like two straight guys. So he told me this whole story, and it was chilling because he was super successful. He made a ton of money, and his wife didn't like him when he was poor, but she liked him when he was rich. And then once they got married, she went back to not liking him again. And I was like, felt so sorry for him, because I think a lot of people do lose touch with, it's easy to lose touch when you have a lot of wealth.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to do that.
Yeah, I feel you. But also, I mean, congrats on the wealth. I mean, it's not a bad thing either. So
it's not bad. I mean, but it doesn't, in my case, what I've discovered is it doesn't really matter because I don't have the ego for it. Like, I just don't really care about the super glitzy, fancy stuff. I mean, I live in St. Louis, Missouri, like one of my cars is a 95 Acura. It still runs. I can't sell it. I mean, I love it. I mean, I got a 2-car garage, it's not a blingy lifestyle. But I got a friend with a boat.
I love that. In general, who do you consider is on your personal board of advisors? You mentioned a couple historical characters as inspirations in your book. When it comes to career and life decisions, who do you talk to?
Well, it would, unfortunately, I've lost 2 of them in the last couple of years. Herb Kelleher, not that I knew him that well, but he was one of these people who really just inspired me and talked straight. And every time I had an interaction with him, 5 or 6 times, I was super impressed by his character and his humor. And he was way more successful than I'll ever be, but he kept it so real and so fun that was an inspiration. As a matter of fact, I don't know if this is going out in video. Like, those are his cigarettes. I took the pack of cigarettes that he gave me. I made him sign the cigarettes. Like, this is Herb's cool menthols, right? This is how much I idolize Herb. So there's Herb's cig on the back of the cigarettes. And the other guy that I idolize, who died last year, was my dad. So there's Dad. Those 2 men who were from a different generation, they had a quality that I have yet to acquire, which is this. I don't even know what it is. It's like they have this wonderful. I'm still trying to figure that out. So those 2, among the living, my wife is huge. So Anna is one of the few people who will tell me, and she has to tell me this frequently when I'm doing something nuts or am acting stupid, or so. And we got married back when I was pre-square. So she doesn't have anything to prove. So and I talk about this in the book. I've never really had a lot of mentors, because up until I researched the book, I didn't realize that I needed a different type of mentor, that I needed somebody like A.P. Giannini was. That I needed a mentor who was an innovator, somebody who was not copying what they were doing. And I know a ton of super successful people who have copied a formula, and they're very good at that, and that formula makes them money. But that's not the game I play. So those mentors, although I have a lot of friends in that category and they will give me advice, if I take their advice and I implement it, it blows up in my face. Like, and this happened to me for years before I realized that, well, first of all, for years, I thought I was an idiot, because I would see my friends who were successful and I would say, well, how did you handle this problem? And they say, oh, well, just do this. And I would go and I would do that. And then it would blow up in my face. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? And eventually the conclusion was, well, it's just me. I'm just incompetent. I can't handle this stuff. What I realized, like 20 years later, having researched and written the book, was, wait a second, there's a different set of math that works if you're innovating. And for very specific reasons, doing the thing that works for everybody else is not going to work for you. And doing the thing opposite sometimes will. And, I talk about this, in the later chapters, but that's just been a profound insight, because it's allowed me to feel sort of better about all my failures, because I was like, well, it wasn't that I was like fundamentally flawed so much as I was doing things the wrong way for the situation that I was in.
When you were founding Square, you wrote a pitch deck listed 140 reasons why Square will fail. You and Jack chatted with big financial companies facing rejections. You found that you guys were breaking 17 different laws. At one point, a regular person would have moved on. What was your mentalities like back then to help you push things forward?
So in the founding of Square, there were two moments that were so impactful to me that I remember exactly where I was when they happened. And one, I was driving my car around St. Louis. I was talking to Jack on the phone. He was in California. I was in St. Louis. And look, this was 2008, 2009. Like the economy was just disaster zone, right? There was a huge financial crisis. And a lot of people would say, well, that's a terrible time to start a business. And I told Jack, I was like, look, I think a recession when there's just blood in the streets is a great time to start a new business. And Jack was like, me too. Like Jack was like, yeah, now's the time you go, when it was just chaos. And, having a business partner who has that same attitude, because Jack and I don't think alike on a lot of things. Like, we have very disparate opinions, but the fact that we were together on that one was great. And then the second time it happened, and I wrote about this in the book, was the first day at the office, when I discovered what we were doing actually violated some laws. and eventually we counted 17 rules that we were breaking with each transaction. But the moment when I turned to Jack and Tristan, who was our one employee, and said, guys, what we're doing is illegal. And they got excited. They were like, cool. Oh, well, actually, Tristan, I'm like, what do you want to do? But Jack was like, you want to quit? I was like, no, I don't want to quit. You want to quit? He was like, no, I don't want to quit. And that was it. We figured that it was, and I'm not talking like this is not a law like murder, this was some stupid rule that was a vestigial part of a banking system that had evolved 50 years ago and didn't account for, all sorts of things, but just the fact that the guy who I'd chosen to go into business with and who chose to go into business with me had this attitude of, great, there are things preventing us from doing what we're doing. Now we've got something interesting. Because look, if there's no barriers, then somebody's probably walked that path 100 times before you, and there's probably nothing that interesting at the end of that path. There might be some money, there might be some notoriety, but like, if you want to do something that hasn't been done, you better get ready for a bunch of barriers. And so the fact that Jack got excited about that as opposed to scared meant that I picked a good partner.
You sort of answered my next question, which is, how do you pick a good business partner? You recognized Jack when he was super young. His mom worked at a coffee shop where you buy coffee beans from. You guys sort of met randomly. It was not that strategic. Right now, many people in tech suggest founders to find a co-founder strategically, look into different skill sets, or just found a company with your family member or a childhood friend. But it sounds like back in time, you didn't think that much when you guys started working together. For a regular person who is starting a company, what should he or she look for in a co-founder?
Well, I think, if you're looking for a co-founder, one of the things you want to do is complement your deficiencies. So fortunately, for me, my deficiencies are fairly well known because I've tried stuff and failed, and I'm like, well, I probably shouldn't be doing that sort of thing. So I had a pretty good list, and Jack has a complementary set of skills and deficiencies. So that worked, and we'd already worked together. So that was great. But the other thing that I think is important, and this is probably going to get around to being more center stage in the world thought right now, because there's this huge push towards diversity and inclusion. So just because somebody's the wrong age or wrong gender or wrong sex or wrong race, or there's some like we've excluded so many potential partners because of the way society just treats people. And I'm not to say that I'm above that, but I've always been one of these people who I think doesn't really care what you look like, what age you're, what race, and so one of the biggest biases, I think, is age. And when I met Jack and started working with him, he was 15 years old. And that raised some eyebrows, but he was also really good. So I didn't think twice about giving him a bunch of, projects for him to manage as a 15-year-old. And so I think that gives you a natural advantage. Like if you can look past whatever people's quantities are, and when I say quantities, it's like stuff that I can put on a form, right? Okay, so what's your gender? What's your age? What's your net worth? What's your, we can sit there and turn you into a series of spreadsheets, and none of that crap really matters when you're looking for the qualities of somebody who is going to be a good partner, because the qualities are like, how do they respond when your product is breaking a law, right? Like if Jack had had a fundamental different set of beliefs, Square wouldn't exist, And if I'd been evaluating my choice of partners on purely qualitative or quantitative means, I probably would have missed some of these more subtle things. So don't get distracted by the numbers.
I really like that you don't hung up by your own mental barriers. Jack was 15. You were older than him. A lot of times people have things they preset in their mind. Many times that was what's blocking them from finding the right partners. Instead of looking for someone who can get things done, they spend time profile matching to find quote unquote perfect background.
So, I've had a lot of really lucky moments. When I was in college, there was a guy named Sam, and he was homeless. And this was, in St. Louis, it's not a great place to be homeless because it's really cold in the winters. And so Sam would hang out at Washington University, and he had a bag with his stuff in it, and he slept in a car in the parking lot, and a big beard. Sometimes he'd smell kind of funny. But he was a nice guy, and I'd see him all the time because every time there was a university function when they were giving food away, Sam would show up. And, one day I was sitting in the student center, and Sam was, sort of nearby, and I was just devastated. Like I couldn't do this math problem. And he looks over at me, he says, what's the problem? And instead of saying something like, oh, you wouldn't understand or nothing, like basically treating him like a homeless guy, I said, well, there's a differential equation that I don't know how to do. And he's like, well, what kind of differential equation? And I said, well, it's a second order non-homogeneous differential equation. And he's like, well, did you factor it? I was like, what? He's like, well, you got to factor it. Like, if you just solve a second order non-homogeneous differential, you have to turn it into a homogeneous part and a non-homogeneous part, and you do that. I was like, what? Like, you're a homeless dude, and he can solve. So it turned out this guy was a math professor. Like, before he became homeless, he was a math professor. But just the fact that I was getting my math help at WashU's engineering school from a guy who literally slept outside a lot, just really sort of reset a lot of my biases. And from a very early age, I've been lucky to have people who've broken stereotypes for me. But if you're thinking about this as a listener, it's not enough to sit there and say, well, don't be biased or don't prejudge people. Because look, everybody says that crap and it doesn't really work. I have a lot of biases. I have a lot of prejudices. Like I do judge people way too fast sometimes. Like, I will assume something based on how you're driving your car and what car you're driving and where you are. And I make all these assumptions. But what I try to keep in mind is, look, I know I'm a biased person, and therefore I have to be extra careful to not let that totally dominate my decision making. Like when there's other facts presented, like the homeless guy is solving your math homework for you. Like, are you going to be willing to accept that? Or are you just going to say, you smell funny and you sleep in the, in an old Buick in the WashU parking lot? Like, I don't think the two things have anything to do with each other. Just because you sleep out, in a car in the parking lot doesn't mean you can't do differential equations.
Wow. I mean, like, that's such a good story. You started Square to serve people like your friend Bob, or like people that are like more, you call it the little guys, I think, in your book. So
not pejoratively, but people who've been left out.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Bank of America founder, IKEA founder, Southwest founder, all kind of did the similar things, right? They all served a market that doesn't exist before. I feel like that's such a great mentality to help people wasn't really being served, to create solution for these people, or creating a solution for a problem that nobody have solved before. It's like a challenge. Curious, how do you come up with a solution on that?
Okay. So what's the formula? Okay. This is the one I use. First, determine what type of problem you have. And if you think about the sample set of problems, you can divide easily into problems that other people have figured out how to solve and problems that people have not figured out how to solve, right? So that's sort of a good line to demarcate, because you want to know what side of that line you're on, because the skills are different. And if you're on the side of the line where people have figured it out, then by all means, figure out who's figured it out and do what they did. Go to YouTube, download a course, take a masterclass, go get another degree. I like whatever it takes, or hire somebody who already has that skill because you don't have time to acquire it yourself. But that's a good way to solve those types of problems, right? But if you're on the other side of the line, I think it gets more interesting. And that's the side of the line that people don't talk about much. That's the side of the line where you don't get to copy the solution. So if you find yourself on that side of the line, first and foremost, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is the ability to recognize that. Okay, so but let's say you've exhausted YouTube, you've searched Google, you've talked to all your friends, you've been at the library, you talked to your great uncle, and you can't find anyone that solved the problem. Then what you need to do is very honestly ask yourself, are you willing to do what it takes to solve an unsolved problem? Knowing that it's probably going to be uncomfortable, knowing that you're probably not going to get a lot of support from people. And it's not because the people don't want to help you. It's because the people care for you and want to protect you. So they're going to say, come back here, Grace. Don't do that. Don't take that. And again, I'm not giving a formula here, but I'm just telling you the way I approach this stuff now is with the insight that traveling is way different if you're an explorer versus a tourist. Okay. So let's say you and I want to go on a trip, and I go, okay, Grace, we're going to go traveling. And you show up and we're about to jump on the airplane, and you've got a beautiful silver suitcase with wheels on the bottom. And I've got on, basically a pack of water and a knife. And you go, wait a second, where are we going? And I'm going, we're going to go to the jungle. And by the way, those little wheels on the bottom of your suitcase are not going to be any good. If you assume you're being a tourist when you travel, which is what I usually do when I travel, I expect there to be a hotel and food and water and, probably some entertainment and, maybe a mint on the pillow if I'm lucky. Like there's all sorts of cool stuff that I get when I'm a tourist. That's one type of traveling. The other type of traveling is somebody pushes you out of an airplane with a parachute over the Amazon. You drop into this place where there's no human life and you have to, survive. And there are a bunch of bugs and plants and animals that want to eat you, and that's a different type of traveling. That is a different, so understand the difference. Like if you come packed for a weekend in France and somebody pushes you out into the jungle, you're not going to be very happy. Doesn't mean you're going to die, but it means you're not as well prepared as if somebody said, hey, look, we're going to the jungle. So maybe for the next month, you want to really get a bunch of malaria shots, learn how to skin a snake or recognize edible plants. I mean, I don't know what you do to prepare for the jungle, because the fact is the jungle is not predictable, but it's at least you will be helped by the mindset. So what I wanted my readers to understand is that, look, we don't go to the jungle every day. Some of us never go there. Some of us are never going to have the will or even the opportunity to go do something that's never been done before, but some of us will. Okay. So what if you're the person who just happens to have the ability to solve one of humanity's unsolved problems? You've just got it. Like, you don't know you got it, but you got it. And then all of a sudden you come against that problem. But your whole life you've been taught to only copy. Your whole life you've been taught to not do something if you're not qualified. And you see that problem and you go, well, I'm not qualified. I can't do it. And that's why I wrote the book, because you're wrong. Yes, you are unqualified, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. And if you, actually, when I was writing the book, I had a very specific person in mind. She's brilliant. She's got a master's degree from the world's best institutions. Like, she's fantastic. But every time she comes in against a problem that she hasn't solved before, she quits. And my 300-page message to her is basically to say, look, the first time that humankind does anything, it's done by somebody who's not qualified. You're just not qualified to do something the first time. You can't be, because we haven't figured out what the qualifications are. So don't automatically quit. And I wanted to reach, I want this book, or at least the ideas of the book, I don't care about how many books sell, but I want the ideas to reach into the heads of millions of people, because I think we've got a lot of problems, and I want millions of people willing to maybe step over that line and take some risk and hopefully move us all ahead.
Absolutely. Speaking of what to invent, what not to invent, I think you're a fan of copying. The basic idea I got from reading the book is I should copy what I could copy. If there is a solution, then copy it. If there's no solution, you invent it. How do I identify which part I should reinvent?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. But let me rephrase your question to make it a little more stark. Your question is, Jim, please tell me what I'm capable of doing and when I should quit, right? You want me to sit there and say, okay, Grace, here's a problem that you can solve, go do it. And this one you probably ought to stay away from, because you can't. Nobody's going to give you that answer. You can't even have that answer. You don't know. And that's part of what makes innovation scary, because if it's being done for the first time, what's the checklist? How many things do you need to do? You don't know. You don't even know if it's physically possible to accomplish. And yet your question, like baked into that question you just asked me, is the thing that we all want, which is this guarantee. We want this, oh, please, Jim, I'll buy your book if it contains this formula that guarantees I'm going to have success. Like, it ain't in my book. Save $20, right? Because you ain't going to get it. What you'll get is a pretty candid discussion of how it feels to actually do it, and some examples of people who've done it, and maybe some patterns you can use. But you're not going to get a formula, and you're also not going to get any sort of guarantee that you're going to succeed if you do it. So I'm sorry, but that's just sort of the bargain.
Have you ever tried something else that you didn't succeed, but like you were using like the same method, and then why did you, I guess, like
all the time? Oh my God, it happens like all the time. So I'm an engineer by training, which is to say engineers work on things that are broken, right? I don't apply my skills to anything that works. So right now I am trying to build this piece of glass I'm making this piece of glass in the studio. It's never been done before that I can find, so I have to invent all these new techniques. It's a real pain in the ass. One of the techniques involves cutting the glass in a way that's never been cut before. Turns out there are no saws anymore. I'm literally rebuilding this saw from like the 1970s. That I think if I can figure out how to put it together correctly, we'll be able to cut this special piece of glass that I'm trying to make. Like, that saw is in 50 pieces. It's a god-awful mess. And by the way, if any of your listeners happen to own a new Dynacut saw, I will pay you $25,000 for one. I know it's double the rate, but I will give you 25 grand right now for a Dynacut wet saw. If you have one, you call me and I'll friggin' put your kid through college. I mean, that's how badly I want to get one of these saws. But I spend my days as an engineer working on stuff that's broken. So when you ask me how much of my stuff doesn't work, my answer is all of it. Like nothing. I mean, okay, the Fed works. I'm a director of the Fed. The Fed's doing pretty well right now. But of the stuff that I'm actually actively involved in, it's all broken. That's what I work on.
I think it takes a lot of courage to keep pushing it. After I read the innovation stack, the major takeaway for me is why Square succeed when Amazon tried to create a similar product is Square was doing 14 things right. Amazon could copy 2 or 3 things, but there's a lot of details and behind the scenes goes into it. Excuse my basic explanation.
I loved your language, but there's one word I'd argue with. And it was your use of the word courage. And the reason I'm picking on that word is because I think to say that innovation or entrepreneurship is courageous is a little bit scary. What I would say is instead of thinking of yourself as being courageous, which I'm not, by the way, I'm afraid of a lot of stuff. Think of yourself as stubborn. I think stubbornness is a little more approachable for people. Like I can be stubborn. I can be very stubborn. And that's almost as good. So it's funny because when I studied all these people for this book, I found that a lot of the successful ones weren't these sort of bold, courageous, adventuring types. They were just normal folks who found themselves in a situation where through whatever twist of fate, were not able to copy. And with the copying removed, they were forced to either invent something or die. And they were too stubborn to die, so they invented something. And they kept working on that until it eventually produced results. And then those results eventually built companies that, were leaders in the world. And that's a pattern that I think is open to everybody. So not just the courageous. It's not just something that you have to have courage with. So, and this is something really interesting. When I originally wrote the book, it was a graphic novel.
Yeah.
It was just cartoons. And I worked really hard. I worked it for about a year. And then I was so proud to tell Herb Kelleher that I'd done this story, not as some boring business book, but as a bunch of cartoons. Mm-hmm. And Herb hated it. He hated the idea. And he hadn't even seen it. I just described the idea to him, and he's like, Jim, he's like, if that's what you're going to do, you can leave me out. So I obviously didn't want to leave Herb out of the book. I would rewrote it, but I was really sort of heartbroken that he didn't like my idea. But the wisdom of his reluctance was that comic books are for heroes. They're hero stories. Mm-hmm. Who's the protagonist in a comic book? It's somebody with superpowers, or at least super strength, or they've got something that is not human, right? And so if you sit there and tell the stories of successful people, and you say this person is super successful because he or she is smarter or stronger or somehow superior to you in some way, well, that's a good excuse for me as just a normal person to quit. I don't have super strength. Bullets don't bounce off me. My hair's falling out. I can't do a damn thing about growing eyelashes. I'm really a mess. How am I able to do this great thing? Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that your listeners understand you don't have to be a courageous person. You just have to put yourself in a situation where sheer stubbornness will produce a result. And I show you how to do that.
I feel like stubborn is a good word, but does that mean it is a numbers game? Say if you try something enough times, it will just work out?
I don't think it's a numbers game. I mean, in the sense that you have to do things the right way. You can't just keep trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. Eventually you will succeed. That is part of it. You do have to keep trying and trying and trying. Eventually you succeed. But it's the way you try. So it's not just a case of any effort works and enough effort eventually, yields a result. I mean, that's the monkey solution, right? We give a monkey a typewriter, they'll eventually type Shakespeare if you give them enough tries. And yes, that's true. However, the 4 quadrillion times that it fails is probably more than you can sustain. So I'm a big believer in process and doing things the right way and approaching, like they're processes even for innovation that work. And the reason we think of it as a numbers game is because if you're on the outside looking in, if you're looking at people who are incredibly successful, I mean, luck plays a part. And I actually go through the math of luck in one of the chapters, but you don't want to depend on luck. You don't want to think, oh, every day I'm just going to get lucky, or maybe, well, whatever works for you, whatever keeps you going. But you do have to eventually do things in the right way. So you can't just be, you just can't be, just a monkey typing on a typewriter. That doesn't work.
How do you improve your strategy on the second or third try? How do you tackle a problem in a smarter way then? Can you give us an example of after second or third try, something started to work out?
So I guess this brings the whole interview around to one of your first questions, which is humility. And I think humility is super important to be successful in innovation. And by humility, I mean, the ability to accept news that you don't believe is true. The ability to not think you're always right. And you have to balance humility with the hubris to keep going. So you have to have this stubbornness, this hubris, this pride or determination to keep going and not give up. But along that path, I think you should be very, very open to the fact that what you have thought was right might not be. Mm-hmm. And if you can maintain that humility, what you'll find, at least, I mean, look, I can't speak for you, but I'll tell you, in my world, I find that a lot of solutions just come to me. Now, they are unfortunately not the ones that I thought of, so I don't get to say, oh, that was my idea, or I don't get to have the pride of saying, well, I'm a visionary. I knew Bitcoin was going to go to $50,000. I didn't know that, you can get a lot of information from the world. Mm-hmm. If the information doesn't have to fit what you know at the beginning.
That makes sense. You give some examples in the book of Southwest Airlines, IKEA, and BOA. Both Southwest and IKEA are super competitive on pricing. People ask Herb Keller, when are you going to increase the profit? He says he's not going to increase the profit. He stays that way on purpose. If your competitive advantage is mostly focusing on pricing, how do you stay competitive that way?
If you have an innovation stack, then there is a very high likelihood that your price will be, or could potentially be, way lower than other companies because you're doing things in a totally different way. And because you're doing things in a totally different way, you can be wildly more efficient. Now, the question is, what do you do with that efficiency? Do you price like the rest of the market, or do you give people who could not otherwise afford it a chance to buy your product? This is a big decision. What I found in my research is that the companies who keep their prices low so that new people can enter the market end up dominating that market. And because they're so efficient, it's very hard for competitors to catch them. So, I mean, you mentioned Herb Kelleher, and I'll tell you that, for the 20 years he ran Southwest Airlines, they were profitable every year, except maybe one. I think there might have been one year where there was a gas shock or something, but there was a very, very strong record of profitability. But during that time, Southwest prices were also a quarter what the other airlines were charging. Well, how is that possible? Well, the answer was Southwest had an innovation stack that allowed them to fly planes way more efficiently than all their competitors. And because Herb never competed with, he never priced by comparing himself to his competitors. They maintained that for 20 years. And then, as a very interesting case study, when Herb left the helm at Southwest, the new manager decided to raise their prices, and they kept raising and raising and raising until they actually got in trouble with the government for price fixing, and eventually gave away their advantage. Southwest had the travel market basically to itself for years under Herb, and now they've got 6 or 7 very strong competitors. It's a perfect case study on how the effects of pricing in an innovation stack change the course of the company.
If you're building Square again, Amazon started saying they're going to do the same product. Back in time, you did nothing. Now, looking back, what would you tell your younger self?
Well, I mean, it all worked out, so I wouldn't want to do things any differently. But I think my advice to my younger self would be to just say, you don't understand the power of what you've built because you don't understand what an innovation stack is. But me, being your older time-traveling self, has seen the future, and guess what? You win this one, and here's why. And I go through the math of that in the book, but fundamentally, it's very, very hard to copy a company with an innovation stack, even if you're Amazon, even if you're one of the most powerful firms on the planet. And that was a central insight that led to the research behind the book, because you wouldn't think that's possible, but I prove it. And then I show how it not only happened to Square, but I happen to have dozens of other companies, and I show the process of how it happens. And once you understand that process, maybe you can rest a little more, a little more peacefully. But look, it's not going to be that comforting, because again, everybody wants a guarantee in life, and if you're doing something that hasn't been done, you don't get that. So even time traveling back to talk to myself, I probably wouldn't say anything except maybe wear more sunscreen.
Let's say Uber and Lyft. I heard from somewhere Lyft started first, then Uber copied Lyft, doing it seemingly more successfully. What's your thought on that?
So it was interesting. I was an advisor to a company called Sidecar, which was Lyft's main competitor. And I outlined a strategy that I thought was definitely going to help them beat Lyft. And they ignored me, so I quit. I was like, well, if you don't want to listen to me, because they just copied Lyft and Lyft wiped the floor with them. Uber copied Lyft, but they were very close as far as what they were doing. Plus, Uber had some more experience with the black cars, so they came at it, and also Uber was more successful fundraising. But a lot of it might have just been execution. I think they're both very successful companies. And I don't know enough about the specifics, because for like 4 years there, Uber and Square were in the same building. Like we moved in first, and then they kind of copied what we did and moved a couple floors beneath us. And then they started stealing our engineers, which really pissed me off. So I've always hated Uber for stealing some of our engineers. So like, I'm not a good person to comment on the Uber list thing because I take it personally. But the whole thing with that is you have a situation where both of those companies had an innovation that the other could copy. And so after a while, neither one of them could outmaneuver. They were just incrementally improving their products. And, Uber would add Lyft would add tipping, and Uber was like, oh, Lyft is winning, we're going to add tipping. And Uber's maps were better, and Lyft was like, hey, we need to steal some engineers from Uber and figure out how they did the maps. And they get 2 guys over, and all of a sudden they tell them how Uber did the maps better. And they'll say, oh yeah, we need to, do different caching on our servers, and now Lyft's maps work as well as Uber's. So those guys are locked in this sort of competitive race. It could have been a singularity, like it could have been a company coming out without the ability for anyone else to copy them. But that's a rare case. Usually in that case, you have to be extremely deep in your innovation stack. You have to do so many things that are not visible to the public. And that's what really protects you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Nowadays, if you're doing something successfully, it's really easy to be copied by people. And some of the innovations probably is hard to be protected by the innovation stack. Taking online publishing as an example, I've seen so many blogs has been rewrite/copied by different people seamlessly. How do you make sure yourself stand out even when the copying bar is low?
So it depends what side of that line you're on. If you are in a business where pretty much everybody copies everyone else, and there are 3 or 4, similar companies, then you can't really protect yourself that much. There's nothing that's going to keep you from preventing your best employees from joining your competitors, from your customers to switching because of a little feature or a price change, or somebody gets pissed off at somebody. But occasionally you get an advantage, and then you get to charge more for a while, and then everybody copies you and you don't have that advantage anymore. And that's sort of how the world works in a lot of ways. That's not the game I talk about. I talk about these companies that begin with an area of focus that's so outside the existing market that the existing market doesn't have tools. Because they don't have the tools that they can just buy from the existing market, they have to invent new tools. Well, those new tools are going to have different effects in different ways, will produce a radically different final product. And you might not see it as a radically different final product if you sort of view it from the outside, but from within, it is way different. And in those cases, I'm not going to say immune to copying, but you are very, very protected. You've had the second shot of the vaccine in that case. You're not, it's not a zero chance, but you got the second shot of the vaccine. Hey man, you can go to the beach again. You can go to a restaurant again. I guess, I've had a few friends who've gotten both of their shots and they're having a good time. The point is, you get a reward for taking the path of innovation. What you don't get is a guarantee that you will be able to complete the path.
We're at the last part of the interview. I have a little fire rounds for you. First question, what's your favorite book?
Satan, His Psychotherapy and Cure by the Unfortunate Dr. Kassler. Jeremy Levin was the author. It's out of print. Jack and I both read it back in the 90s. Hilarious story. Favorite book that I'm reading right now is Churchill's set of World War II. And I'm just in The Gathering Storm, was reading it last night.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Well, I was pretty much alone. My partnership with Jack has been a big deal. So I guess I'd give it to Jack. But I was so weird when I was doing the stuff that I was doing early in my career and nobody else was doing it, that I wish I'd had more impactful people, but I just never found that person. So it was tough. But I always go to my dad for help. Like I'd go home feeling bad and Dad would make me a martini and
wow, make you a martini.
That was that. Yeah.
Love that. That's sounds like a great problem solver.
Yeah.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who do I invite to my dinner party? People I disagree with. I would be so interested in all these people who are climate change deniers. How the hell I don't understand that. Conspiracy theorists. I don't understand conspiracy theorists because if you've ever tried to run anything, that shutting people up is so difficult. How are you going to maintain a conspiracy? I don't know. I would try to find not exclusively, but people, you want some people who are positive and, have a good attitude, but I love spending time with people who I don't understand and disagree with. That's really interesting. And I spend a lot of time now, because I'm on the Federal Reserve, I'm deputy chair of the Fed in St. Louis here. And if you join the Fed, you have to be politically neutral. So I'm not Republican. I am not Democrat. I am not allowed to take a side in anything. And so for the entire Trump presidency, I was politically neutral. And it's given me a lot of really good insights because instead of arguing with people, I just sat there and listened. And I've learned a lot from both sides. And I really appreciate the fact that the Fed forced me to sort of grow in that way. It's a wonderful thing to do, is listen to folks who you disagree with.
What is one skill you're constantly trying to improve?
Listening.
Where can we find you outside of work?
At the Glass Studio, but that's kind of technically work. Okay, so here's one. I'm a pilot. I just passed my commercial test, but I don't do it as a profession. So I am now getting to the point where I guess it could be a profession if I really wanted to, but I'm probably not going to be a professional pilot. I'd like to be able to fly that well, but I don't think I ever will. But
I'm sure you're a great pilot. Anyone who survived their own piloting skill, I feel like it's a good pilot.
Yeah, I guess by definition, if you're not dead, you're probably good enough, right?
Yes. So what do you wish you know when you're 20, when you're in your 20s?
Oh my God. It's exactly the stuff I wish. I wish I'd known the difference between entrepreneurship and business. I wish I'd known the difference between copying and innovating. I've made that mistake so many times. There's a lot of stuff that I didn't know when I was 20. Like I didn't know when I was 20 that when people ask, how are you doing? That's not a real question, right? Like I was like, well, I'm doing fine. Why do you like? It's communication on a different level. It's social vibing. It's expressing concern. It's a way of sort of showing love for somebody who, I didn't understand any of that sort of social stuff because I'm kind of a nerd and I'm probably pretty messed up. But yeah, there's a bunch of stuff like that. But at least certainly in business, the differentiation between a business venture and an entrepreneurial venture. And I can use a pilot analogy if you want. This is funny. If you're a pilot and you're coming in to land a plane, all of a sudden the controls stop working. So normally you push the yoke down, you go down, you pull the yoke up, the plane goes up. That works until you hit a certain speed. And at that airspeed, the yoke no longer makes the plane go up and down. It just stops working. And the throttle, which usually makes the plane go faster and slower, you push the flat throttle and the plane flies faster. It stops working at the exact same airspeed. And what they train you to do when you're a pilot is to recognize this airspeed and effectively control the plane using a different set of inputs. But they're exactly different. And if you don't know this, you die. So literally every time you've been on an airplane, your life depends on the pilot recognizing this very specific speed and knowing that at that speed or below, they have to control the airplane using a totally different set of control inputs. Otherwise you die. And that's one of the things you learn as a pilot. And it's analogous to the world of business in the sense that you can copy all your life. But if you cross that line into innovation and you don't recognize that the control inputs change, that things behave differently in this other world, you're going to crash. So I would have loved to have known that earlier.
Wow. Yeah, that's like, I don't know. That's also deep. I love it. Thank you so much, Jim, for coming on to the show today.
This has been wonderful. And you were so well prepared. I really appreciate that. I really respect how much effort you put into crafting a quality product.
All right. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Peace on LinkedIn. It's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. go to smartventurepod.com, click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button. See you next time.